defend, not giving the opportunity to the real upcoming forces. There are examples of fighters who had Moore. He spent 5 years waiting as number one. Mantequilla Nápoles 6 years as the number one contender, etc. In most cases, the mandatory contender works. I cannot speak on the other organization's process. I can only respond to what the WBC does. And we have been consistent in making sure that the mandatory process is at the highest level possible. The reality with having multiple organizations and multiple titles, the quality of the challengers dilute in many occasions. What the WBC has been consistent in doing is making sure that we order a final elimination fight to determine the mandatory contender, but we always encourage also unification bouts. We do not get in way of unification bouts, and I don't recall a problem with a mandatory contender in the recent years to have been an obstacle for the great fights to happen. Of course, there are examples, there are mistakes, but I feel very comfortable in what we do regarding this. Speaking about Gildirim, Gildirim fought against Derail, and he could not finish that fight. He was stopped short due to an accidental headbutt. And he had won round 8 and 9. He was coming very strong. I think that Gildirim is much better than many think. And in this situation, Gildirim is the one who had all the rights. And he accepted in an exemplary manner to step aside and allow Canelo against Smith. So we are working closely with this topic. You are absolutely correct. Our rules are very clear that we want the best fights. We want the development of the sport. We do not want to give mandatories to fulfill and to just to impose. We are very flexible. We are very understanding case by case. And I invite you anytime that you would like to have a meeting, we can review each division, we can review each case, and you will see how we work and how we mediate, and we do not allow a mandatory contender to abuse that position. I have discussed in the past, maybe not to the formality that I wish, but I have discussed with the other organizations a concept of whenever there's a unified champion, we should do a tournament or fight between the mandatory contenders.
Yes, I agree.
So at the end, the champion
absolutely
has to do one mandatory, not 3 or 4 or 2 in a row, and that holds back the development of the sport. So it's complicated, it's not easy. Each organization has their own rules and their own agenda. Each promoter has their own plan, each champion. So it is not as easy, but if we could get some tournament going, some planning ahead, you know, when you have a fighter that you know is going to be a unified champion, because once you get a mandatory contender, it becomes a legal problem. Once you're mandatory, they're going to enforce it, and it's a problem. And the worst thing that can happen is a fighter losing a belt because the abusing of a mandatory contender, or the other side is when the champion abuses his position and does not want to fight a tough mandatory. So it goes both ways. We're trying to handle it the best way possible. And you are right, it's a very important topic in our sport that deserves attention.
Hey, Mauricio, Rick Muhammad here, Brawler Sports Media. So, with regards to that, in the Wilder situation with Fury, what are we facing here as far as that goes? Do they vacate the belt and go ahead and move on to fight Anthony Joshua, or do they go ahead and honor the mandatory that was in the contract clause for Wilder in a trilogy fight versus Fury? Where are we at on that?
Rick, you have a misconception of the terms. What Fury and Wilder have is a contract between them.
Okay.
The WBC is not a party of that contract. I understand they are in mediation addressing their situation. For the WBC at this moment, there is no mandatory contender in the division.
Okay, so you guys don't get involved with whatever the contract stipulates amongst the fighters and their teams.
Correct.
Roger that. Thank you for that clarification.
Mauricio,
Yes, Chris.
buenas tardes, Mauricio. Le quisiera preguntar, David Benavidez, 168 champion, he lost his belt on the scale. Canelo just won it. On Saturday night, the first thing that David Benavidez asked for was the fight. Is there any plans for the WBC to order that fight? Because that's the fight that the fans really want, and that's the fight, the boxing heads want. David Benavidez quiere la pelea con Canelo. El sábado mandó el mensaje por Instagram y Twitter. Él quiere pelear contra Canelo. La CMB no va a ordenar esa pelea. Esa es la pelea que quiere toda la afición. ¿Sí me puede contestar en español, por favor?
Sí, muy lamentablemente Benavidez perdió su título en la báscula. Es una pena. Es la segunda ocasión en que él pierde el cinturón por cuestiones fuera del ring. Es muy penoso. Nosotros lo hemos apoyado de manera consistente. Está clasificado número 1. En este momento, Gildirim es el retador oficial y ese es el tema que ahorita se está atendiendo. Entonces, fue cumpleaños de Benavidez, lo felicité, estoy en contacto con él, le deseo lo mejor, le pido un poco de paciencia. Él se ocasionó su propio destino y está fuera del control, pero yo espero que él pronto pueda pelear por el campeonato.
You want to tell them in English? Thank you.
Yes, he was asking about David Benavidez. I just explained that very unfortunately, he lost the belt on the scale. This is the second time that Benavidez loses the WBC championship outside of the ring. He's an undefeated fighter. But unfortunately, that happened, and he's ranked number 1 in the WBC by merit, and he just has to wait, and hopefully he will be fighting for the title next year. But at this time, the mandatories have Gildirim.
Brawlers, baby.